He paused in the shadow of the doorway because the words stopped him like cold air. From the living room came a voice so small it could have been swallowed by the cushions, a low tremor on the other end of a phone. "My fiancé left me before the wedding." Camilla's shoulders shook beneath the soft yellow lamp. Valentina, 4½, had her face buried in Camilla's shoulder, the child's hair smelling faintly of crayons and melted chocolate. The toddler's small hand clutched at the fabric of Camilla's sleeve as if it were a life raft. Ricardo stood very still. He was supposed to be in the middle of a rare late work call, 2 floors down in the den, but something in the tone, how her voice crumpled on that single sentence, pulled him. He had been paying attention to his house manager's updates that afternoon, making decisions that flowed and receded like the city's traffic. He knew his nanny's name. He knew the rhythm of the house. But he had not expected to walk into someone else's private fracture. He listened for a moment more, not because he wanted to intrude, but because the sound replayed a fracture he recognized. Years before, he had stood on his own balcony while an empty suitcase sat by the bedroom door. That night had taught him what abandonment felt like in the bones. He had not thought about the ache for a long time. It had been packed away like old photographs. Hearing Camilla now pulled that old ache into light. He could have turned and left. It would have been easy to pretend he hadn't heard. He might have called the agency, hired temporary help, sent a message to arrange for immediate time off. But the pause lasted only a heartbeat, and then he crossed the threshold. Camilla, eyes raw and warm with unshed tears, tried to hide the phone from him, as if she had been caught doing something shameful. It was an instinct. Cover up pain, make it smaller. Ricardo's presence made the room tilt. A man in a dark sweater, with tired lines at his eyes and the effortless composure of someone who moved through the world used to being obeyed. Valentina's head popped up. "Did he cry, Mummy?" Camilla forced a laugh that came out thin. "No, baby. Just rest. It's okay." Ricardo, who had learned early not to hover where he was not wanted, chose a corner of the room and stayed there anyway. He did not ask for explanations right away. He simply set his coat down, folded, and made himself present in the only language he now trusted, action. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. It was a small question. It was also an offer of permission, to be seen, to be imperfect. Camilla swallowed. She had been rehearsing a different script all day. Collect the dress from the dry cleaner, call Helena to come pack the bridal trousseau, get the security deposit back, explain to the apartment manager that a breakup had just happened. She had not rehearsed being watched by the millionaire who paid her salary. "I'm fine," she heard herself say, the words brittle. "It's just complicated." He glanced at Valentina, who had already begun to hum one of her invented songs. That tiny humming broke the taut line of Camilla's composure, and she laughed against her own chest. "Do you want to sit down?" Ricardo offered. It was practical. It was not pity. "No, She closed her eyes to stop the blur. "I need to pick up some things tonight. Bruno left a lot. I don't want Valentina to see it all. I can't—" Ricardo's mouth went flat. "Tell me where to find the boxes. I'll have my staff help. You shouldn't do this alone." She had expected suggestions that could be scheduled, packages of help deferred until morning. She had not expected this. A man offering immediate, precise help in a tone that refused to make her shame into a spectacle. It made the corners of her stubbornness soften. "There are a few things at his place," she admitted. I'll just go tonight. Pick up what I can." "You don't have to," Ricardo said. "Take the guest room. We'll sort the rest in the morning. I'll have someone drive you with Helena." Camilla's eyebrows rose. "The guest room?" "Yes, it's private. You can stay as long as you need while you figure things out. No strings, no expectations. I can increase your salary for a while if that helps." She had lived on a tightrope of budgets and careful promises. Increases in salary sounded like salted gifts and also loud, impossible favors. Her first instinct was to refuse. Pride is a fierce animal when it's been broken before. "I can't just—" she started, then closed her mouth. The words came out softer. "I don't want anyone's pity, Mr. Costa. Call me Ricardo." He said it plainly, not flinching at the use of his first name. "And I don't offer pity. I offer a roof for now and help. Take it or leave it." There was an earthquake in the space between what was offered and what was available. Camilla had been in the business of saying yes to things that made survival possible. This was a yes that felt like a cliff edge. She could imagine 1,000 versions of this conversation. The neighbor who'd offer temporary shelter with a calendar of payments, the agency arranging a short-term contract elsewhere. But here in his living room with Valentina tugging at her sleeve, the choice felt oddly dignified because it came with options, not absolutes. "How long?" she asked. "As long as you need to make a plan," he replied, "and we'll keep it professional. Separate rooms, privacy, boundaries. If you'd rather not take money—" "No, I accept the pay," she cut in. "I need to keep working. I don't want charity, I just—" Her voice broke on the last word. "Come pack what you need. We'll go now," he said. She hesitated, then nodded. The decision had a strange clarity, safety without strings, help without judgment. She stood to gather her phone, a small purse, and a shopping bag with a spare dress she had kept folded for special days. Valentina let go of her arm reluctantly. The child's thumb found her mouth as if to soothe. They moved efficiently, without ceremony. Ricardo's security team came with cases of moving blankets and a polite, competent disinterest in gossip. Helena, Camilla's friend and backup nanny, arrived with a duffel and the kind of practical anger that said she would burn a city to ashes if anyone hurt Camilla. Bruno was already gone from the apartment that had been meant to hold promises. There was a stack of mail on the counter, unopened invitations, a cake receipt, and somewhere in an upper bedroom, the wedding dress still hung like a memory on a padded hanger. The apartment smelled faintly of cologne and dust. Camilla packed quickly, hermetically sealing some things in boxes and tucking others into a single tote. She worked with the efficiency of someone who had spent years slicing sorrows into manageable pieces. Helena joked too loudly to keep the mood from tipping into pity. Ricardo loaded boxes into the back of the car with broad hands that made the ordinary act of moving feel less like a humiliation and more like a competent business transaction. On the drive home, the city lights blurred past, and the car smelled of coffee and the wool of Ricardo's scarf. Valentina dozed against Camilla's shoulder, the child's breaths small and regular. The silence stretched between Camilla and Ricardo like an unpracticed rope. "You didn't have to come," she said finally. "I didn't want you going through that alone," he replied. The honesty in his voice was spare, almost brusque. "I know what sudden absence does to a person." She glanced up, surprised. "You understand?" He let a brief memory slide across his face like a film strip. A door latch clicking shut, the scatter of a suitcase, the numbing quiet afterward that made even laughter from elsewhere sound like a reprimand. "Years ago," he said, "someone left. It was sudden. It took me a long time to trust that silence again." Camilla understood that kind of silence intimately. She had laid awake in the nights that followed Bruno's disappearance, making a list of broken promises like prayer beads, each one a knot. But there was a difference in their stories. Ricardo's abandonment had been a public fracture, an elegant breakup that became small gossip. Hers had been private, shameful in a way she could not explain. Bruno had simply stopped answering messages. He had not looked at her again before the wedding. He had left his things as if to make departure neat. They pulled into the lane that led to Ricardo's house. It was the kind of lane lined with deciduous trees that let streetlight fragment into gold coins. Ricardo recommended a cup of tea, a comfort offering. Helena checked in via text that she would swing by tomorrow. Camilla carried a small stack of boxes up the steps and into the guest room. A suitcase, a box of shoes, the folded dress she had not yet been brave enough to put away. The room was modest but thoughtful. A lamp low on the bedside table, a small stack of children's books, a window that let in the early morning light. Ricardo had it made up as a real guest room, not an impromptu storage closet, and that distinction mattered. It said, "You are seen as a person, not a temporary fix." Before he left, Ricardo knelt down to Valentina's level, his voice gentle and a little awkward at the ricochet of authority and warmth. "Valentina, will you help Camilla get settled? Show her where your crayons are?" Valentina, who had already decided that the world belonged to her for short bursts, nodded solemnly. "I will," she promised, as if making a treaty. Camilla watched as Ricardo straightened and then, in a movement that betrayed more nerves than his composed face suggested, pressed a small envelope into her hand. "This is for anything you might need tonight," he said. "Clothes, coffee, whatever. No explanations." She looked at the envelope, then up at him. "I don't take gifts," she said, the old muscle memory of refusing charity tightening. "This isn't a gift," he said. "It's to make sure you can eat something other than instant noodles while you pack." There was no flourish, no theatrical magnanimity. He walked away with his hands in his pockets, the decision made and unannounced. She sat on the edge of the bed and opened the envelope. A few bills, nothing extravagant, but precise enough. The smallness of it made it intimate, not showy. She placed the money in the bedside drawer and lay back for a moment, the ceiling above her like a pale distributor of doubts. If this story is grabbing you, like and comment. Let us know what you think of ordinary kindnesses every once in a while. The next morning settled on them in soft, unshowy ways. Camilla worked her usual shift, but now in a home where she had temporary residence. She kept to her hours. She took their routines seriously. Valentina learned new songs, made a habit of bringing Camilla a sun-warmed cup of tea at 9 every morning, and decided that Camilla's bed was, for now, an extra good place to nap. Ricardo left for work each day, with a pocket of things that used to be solely his concern. Contract notes, charity board emails, a pair of taped reading glasses. He came home differently, watchful in the small ways. He noticed when Camilla's hands trembled with fatigue and offered her a seat. He didn't hover, never that, but he left small, unobtrusive traces of care, a packet of her favorite tea placed thoughtfully on the kitchen counter, a streaming service password casually written on a sticky note, an extra warm blanket folded and ready. They kept boundaries they had both agreed to with measured language. The agreement was not a formal paper contract. It was a sequence of conversations held over mugs and under the diffuse light of early mornings. Ricardo said what he was comfortable changing and what he was not. Camilla said what she needed to feel safe, privacy, the right to decline help she didn't want, a clear end date to the stay if she chose one. He agreed. She accepted his increased wages on the condition that she would continue as employee, not tenant. They negotiated things like professional equals, the exchange rings of their arrangement being respect and clear terms. Valentina played the mediator between them without ever understanding what she was doing. At breakfast one morning, she held up a crayon drawing to Camilla, a stick-figure family with a house above it and hearts between them. "Is that us?" she asked. The question was as ordinary as chewing toast. The weight of it was not lost on either of the adults. Camilla crouched to Valentina's height, smoothing the paper with the care of someone handling glass. "It's a very nice family," she said. "We are a big family in here." Ricardo came into the kitchen on the tail of sunlight and smiled at the picture. "It's perfect," he said. The way he said it, the lack of anything more decisive, felt like both a consolation and a promise. There were small friction points. Sometimes she felt embarrassed to take a shower where the towels smelled of detergent that was not hers. He wound up at the other side of a door at odd hours to make sure the child had teeth brushed. Once, early on, Camilla found a caution in his eyes when she took a day to call an old friend. She felt suddenly raw, as if being watched for a sign that she would leave. The power imbalance was real, but they kept talking so that it did not harden into an unspoken expectation. Camilla asked questions she had never asked an employer before. Did he expect anything beyond her work hours? What would happen if she wanted to move out? He answered each time directly. He understood the danger of unspoken rules more than most. One afternoon, while Valentina napped with a heavy book balanced on her stomach, Camilla found herself in the kitchen, fingers busy as if they wanted to fold worry into something useful. Ricardo appeared in the doorway holding a small wrapped package of something he called emergency tea, a nod to the previous envelope, and then, unexpectedly, he set a folded towel on the counter. "I noticed yours were thin," he said matter-of-factly. "I keep extras in the linen closet." She took the towel with both hands, surprised at the exchange's intimacy. "Thank you," she said. It was the kind of thanks that didn't require explanation. He nodded and left. There were evenings when she would hear him in his study, the soft tapping of a keyboard or the rustle of a newspaper, and she would feel a complicit curiosity. What did his loneliness look like? It wasn't the same as hers. His had tasteful linens and private flights, but the hollowness felt similar, the way a seat at a restaurant can remain empty even when every other chair is full. On a rainy Sunday, the three of them, Camilla, Ricardo, and Valentina, ended up in the same narrow living room, each with a mug warming their hands. Valentina had glued a string of cotton balls to the coffee table and declared it a cloud runway. She sent plastic animals sliding down it with solemnity, and then, in a sudden spurt of childhood clarity, asked, "Are you married, Mr. Ricardo?" He paused, the question like a pebble dropped between them. "No," he said simply. "Will you marry Camilla?" Valentina asked, eyes enormous and hopeful. Camilla choked on the tea she wasn't yet supposed to be drinking. The question landed with lightness and yet pulled something heavy to the surface. Ricardo's face softened and he set his mug down. The two adults exchanged a look that was careful and loaded with the long histories they had not yet traded in full. "Not now," Ricardo said finally. "But we are family here. That matters." It wasn't a refusal. It wasn't a promise either. It was the shape of their new possible lives. Uncertain, measured, honest. Camilla found herself telling him, in fragments she meant as practicalities but that were also small confessions, about the time she had been left before. "When my mother left," she said one night while tucking Valentina into bed, "I thought I would have to do everything myself. I learned to be light on my feet." Ricardo listened, his gaze steady. "When Fernanda left, it felt like a door slammed behind me without my knowing I had been standing there," he said once, very quietly. He didn't rehash names. He didn't turn his pain into a lesson. He used it simply as a bridge between his experience and hers. There were days when Camilla replayed the moment she had first heard Bruno's silence. Sometimes she woke with the phantom vibration of messages that would never come. Other times she found herself laughing when Valentina made a new game out of folding napkins into little sailors. It was in those small slices of life, Valentina insisting on 2 sandwiches, not 1, the way Ricardo would hum under his breath when he was thinking, that the house became less like a stage and more like a workshop for living. Helena checked in, pragmatic and fierce. "Don't let him buy you out," she said, half joking. "Make sure there's dignity in this." "There is dignity," Camilla told her, more certain in her voice than she felt. She had a contract of terms in her head now, privacy, a clear return to her work life, no hidden expectations. The arrangement was a shelter, not a surrender. And yet the human heart is a creature that accumulates small debts. Ricardo kept paying his in ways that were quietly large. He sat through Valentina's endless theatrical duets with a patience that made Camilla wonder if he had once been an audience for someone he loved. He remembered to refill her favorite tea, even when he had less time than he thought. He brought home a new pair of slippers one night because hers had holes. None of it redeemed or replaced what had been broken, but it made the mornings easier to face. One late evening, Camilla found herself folding a small red sweater that Valentina had painted with thumbprints. Ricardo appeared in the doorway with a bowl of fruit, watching without interrupting. "How are you sleeping?" he asked. "Some nights are better," she admitted. "Some nights I wake thinking he'll call, then I remember. He won't." He sat at the dining table and folded his hands. "I worry you might see this as charity," he said. "I want it to feel—" He searched for the word. "Safe, not a favor." Camilla looked at him. "I know that," she said. "That's why I took it." He nodded. "And I want you to know. I don't expect anything in return." She raised an eyebrow at the sincerity and the underlying question. "Not even your thanks?" "Consider my thanks given," he said, and for the first time he let a small smile show. It was quick and private and utterly human. They had learned to set up guardrails around the most treacherous territory, affection. They wrote them in the air with simple agreements. If attraction started to change the work, they would speak openly. If either wanted to move on, the other would respect it without adding pressure. Camilla found that the act of naming the rules made her feel less like an employee and more like a person in a household. For once, her life was not reduced to tasks. Valentina, relentlessly honest, kept steering them toward the future in ways they did not expect. Once, she drew a map of the house with a heart in the middle and a dotted line from Camilla's room to Ricardo's study. "When I grow up," she announced at breakfast, "I will have a baby, and you will be the daddy, and Camilla will be the mummy." "That's a very specific career plan," Ricardo said with a laugh. "It is," she said gravely, "and I will be good at it." Camilla set down her fork. The child's map was an unfiltered wish, neither naive nor manipulative, only hope drawn in crayons. It tugged at something in both of them. They did not answer her plan with commitments. They both said what was true on that day. "We will be here for you." As the days turned into a month, the morning rituals stitched them together. Valentina's insistence on pancakes the Sunday she had no school, Camilla's habit of tucking a spare scarf into the child's backpack on cool mornings, Ricardo's tendency to leave the kettle boiling a little longer for Camilla's second cup. Little things, strong things when collected. Still, there were moments of unease. Once, returning home after a long day, Camilla found her suitcase in the guest room slightly ajar. It was a small thing, easily explained by Helena's presence earlier that day, but it sent a flare of something old through her. She took another quick inventory of the terms they had agreed upon and found them intact, but the ache lingered. It reminded her that innocence in the face of possibility could be dangerous. She carried this caution with her, a personal talisman. Ricardo, for his part, felt the tug of unfamiliar territory. He noticed himself thinking of small things he had not considered before, how Camilla liked her tea, whether she preferred the rain or sun through the window, the way she hummed when she ironed. These details were like pebbles he kept tossing at a calm surface to see what ripples would come. He did not bowl her over with gifts or declarations. He watched, and sometimes, when he thought she would not see, he adjusted the world slightly to make room, a favorite biscuit placed by the kettle, an extra cushion on the sofa. Then one evening, after a long stretch of ordinary domesticity, Ricardo asked if they could have a talk in the study. The words felt formal and carried a gravity that made Camilla instinctively prepare for the worst. A sudden termination of the arrangement, a withdrawal of help, a demand to move out. Instead, he sat down and spoke plainly. "I want to be clear about something," he said. This arrangement, I want it to be fair. I'm offering you a place to stay and increased wages for the duration. I expect your professional work to continue as it has been, but I don't want you to feel trapped by any of this. If you want to leave, you leave. If you prefer to stay, you stay. No strings. Camilla felt relief and suspicion both. And if I stay because I need stability, she asked. Then we'll renegotiate terms so you feel respected, he said. If you feel like you're losing your agency, tell me. She wanted to say that she had lost agency for years and was learning, painfully, to get it back. Instead, she nodded. She had been rehearsing her lines for life. Now she was living them out. I appreciate that, she said. They agreed on a timeline, a vague frame, flexible and humane. It was part of the dignity of the arrangement. It kept the power from pooling. That night, after Valentina had been coaxed into bed by a promise of an extra story, Ricardo lingered by the child's doorway. He watched Camilla tuck the blanket around Valentina's small frame and kiss the child's forehead. For a moment, he looked like a man who had been offered a view he had not known he wanted, domestic, intimate, human. He recognized a desire that frightened him because it had to do with things he had long divided into compartments: love, parenthood, responsibility. Camilla noticed him watching and met his eyes across the dim hallway. There was an unspoken question there. Are we both keeping it honest? He nodded almost imperceptibly, an affirmation that this alliance would remain built on consent and clear intention. The following morning, Ricardo made an offer that felt dangerously practical. A weekend away, a small trip to the coast. He framed it carefully. A family weekend, he said. No expectations, just get away. The sea is quiet. It helps to see the horizon. Camilla considered the proposition as she folded laundry. A trip could feel like an intrusion or a balm. She imagined the beach with its honest wind, the child building castles, songs drifting between them without carefully arranged sentences. She also imagined what it could do, eyes softening, defenses lowering, the slow, dangerous tapering of distance. "Why now?" she asked. "Because sometimes the city keeps reminding you of what you've lost," he answered. "I thought maybe we could use a little less of that. No pressure, just the three of us." There it was, an invitation balanced on the tightrope of their new reality. It could be a step that collapsed the fragile privacy they had built, or it could be a place to learn to be together without the seasons of the city crowding in. Camilla folded the last shirt with the care she had when she wrapped gifts. She didn't respond immediately. She wanted to be sure she would not say yes out of need or fear. She wanted to say yes because the idea made a hollow place in her feel less empty, for reasons she could not yet name. Valentina bounded into the room like an announcement. "Can we go to the beach, please? I will make a sand cake." Ricardo smiled, a real, unguarded smile that reached his eyes. "We'll go if Camilla agrees." Camilla looked at the child, at Ricardo, at the neatly packed boxes waiting in the hall. She imagined the sea, a wide, untidy place that swallowed up everything and made new things possible. She thought of telling Bruno that his absence had not broken her completely. She thought of saying nothing at all and simply letting the noise of the waves be the punctuation between what was and what could be. She put down the shirt. "Maybe," she said at last, and the room inhaled. He let the word hang like an invitation. "Take your time." She did. She turned it over like a coin between her fingers, weighing the weight of the offer against the worth of her boundaries. The past months had taught her that trust was built slowly, in the space between daily kindness and honest conversation. She did not want a dramatic romance built overnight from good gestures. She wanted to be sure that whatever grew here would be chosen, not coerced, not traded for shelter. Later that evening, alone in the small guest room, Camilla sat on the edge of the bed with a cup of tea cooling in her hands. Outside, the city murmured its normal late-night breath. The house itself seemed to be holding its breath as well, waiting for a decision that was not yet required. She thought about the day Bruno had left, how silent the room had been after he closed the door. She thought about the envelope Ricardo had given her and how small kindness had felt like a warm hand in the dark. Somewhere downstairs, Ricardo laughed quietly at a television show, the sound muffled by floors and walls. It was an ordinary human sound, not a gesture meant for her. She found herself listening to it as one might listen to the pattern of rainfall, predictable, comforting, but not yet intimate. She would decide about the trip tomorrow, or maybe tomorrow after that. The week ahead promised more routines, more tiny kindnesses. Valentina would draw more pictures. They would continue negotiating the boundaries of their lives like cartographers mapping a new shore. For the first time since Bruno's absence, she did not feel entirely alone in the dark. Outside, the wind picked up, and for a few seconds the house felt like it belonged to itself, not to the past. Camilla folded the cup into her hands and let herself imagine, just a little, a future that might be built out of many small mornings, not a single sweeping rescue. The idea was both terrifying and oddly tender. Down the hallway, Ricardo closed his laptop and wrote a short list of things to bring for the weekend, then stopped himself. He added, "Ask Camilla if she'll come," to the top of the list, and then folded it into his pocket. He left the study light on and went to the doorway to look toward the guest room, where a sliver of lamplight cut across the carpet. For a moment, he simply watched the house breathe. Camilla, with the map of her life slightly smoothed by the promise of shelter and the slow rebuilding of trust, lay back and let the city sounds play like a distant tide. The choice to accept this strange, careful kindness had been made. The rest, whether it would become only a season or something more, had not yet been decided. The days between were waiting, quiet and full of small, possible things. The choice to accept this strange, careful kindness settled into the days like a new habit, unfussy, repetitive, slow to show itself as anything more than ordinary. They packed for the weekend in measured movements. A small suitcase for Camilla, a bright bucket with toy shovels Valentina insisted on bringing, a thermos of coffee Ricardo tucked into the car. The trip was framed always as simple and practical, air that wasn't weighed down by their city, a short drive to a stretch of coast with grey rocks and wide sand. That plainness made the invitation easier to consider. On the morning they left, Valentina announced her conditions with the absolute logic children use to reroute adult plans. "If we go to the beach, Camilla needs to bring her purple sweater," she said, laying her demand out like a treaty. "And you have to let Camilla pick the snacks." Camilla smiled at the seriousness of it. She found that planning a trip with a 4-year-old made any social choreography obvious. Someone would be in charge of snacks, someone would be in charge of towels, someone would be in charge of the small, urgent affairs of being human. The roles made things less fragile. On the drive, the city dissolved into suburbs, and then into a sweep of hills that smelled like pine and salt. Valentina sang a made-up song about crabs who wore hats. Helena rode behind them in the company van, a protective presence who kept to practical commentaries and gentle teasing, as if she were supervising the emotional architecture of the weekend more than its logistics. The house by the sea was low and close to sand. It had a porch that let the wind throw its hair through their laundry. Ricardo had insisted on nothing ostentatious, no grand hotel room, no private yacht, because the point of the trip, he had said, was horizon, not spectacle. They arrived in a slow exhale. The ocean was a broad mouth, and the sky seemed to unbutton itself. Their first afternoon was a collection of small, unpressured events. Valentina built a fortress of wet sand, gluing shells into towers and assigning each to a particular stuffed animal. Camilla sat at the water's edge, toes sunk into damp grains, watching the child with a kind of careful, widening affection. Ricardo walked along the surf with Helena, the two adults speaking quietly about predictable things, local recommendations, the time for dinner, a tide schedule. He kept glancing back at Camilla as if measuring the air between them to see if it had changed. At dusk, when the light thinned into a violet hush, they made a small fire on the beach and ate simple food, the kind of meal that smelled better because it was eaten outside. Valentina fell asleep in Camilla's lap with her head full of salt and sand, and Camilla held her and let the heat of the tiny body steady the tremor that still came some nights. Ricardo fetched an extra blanket and draped it over them, without announcing the kindness. It was the kind of tender gesture that could have felt like charity, but didn't. It felt like a practical response to a sleeping child, and that practical frame made it safe. That night, when everyone else had retired to the rooms, Ricardo walked out onto the porch alone and sat, the sea, a dark companion. Camilla, finding herself awake and unable to sleep, stepped outside in her sweater. They stood a few feet apart for a while, listening to the ocean, each aware of the other's nearness like the soft pressure of tide. "I didn't want the trip to feel like a statement," Ricardo said at last. The words were low and cautious. "I wanted something quiet. For Valentina. For you. For me too, I suppose." Camilla watched his profile in the moonlight. The rawness of the last months had not disappeared. It lurked beneath small conversations and daily chores. "I like that it's simple," she said. "It lets things be what they are." He turned toward her. "I think about things sometimes," he said slowly, "that I didn't think I would. I see how you move through the day. I see how you give the child the kind of attention that isn't performance. It's real. It matters." She felt something in her chest that was not quite hope and not quite fear. "What does that mean?" she asked. "Nothing decisive," he said. "I only mean to say that you're important to our little household. That's all." She nodded. It was both a modest and a brave confession. It didn't demand anything. She liked that he kept the stakes low. It let her answer honestly. "You're important to me too," she said. "But I'm careful. I don't want to hurry back into something I don't understand." He met her gaze then, with a steadiness that felt like permission. "We can move slowly," he said. "We set the pace." They went back inside, with a mutual sense of truce. Their hands brushed once on the doorway, a small touch, more accidental than intended, and both of them felt it like a question left open. The next morning was wide with light. Valentina insisted they make a sand museum, and their day passed in the easy, unedited way of people who are not trying to be romantic. They swam in choppy waves, chased a kite that Valentina insisted on steering, and later shared a lunch of roasted fish and bread that tasted better because their hands were sun-warm. Helena teased them mercilessly about how quiet Ricardo had become. "You look like a man about to purchase a pet." Ricardo laughed openly, and the sound belonged to the day. On the second evening, with the house grown still, Ricardo suggested a walk along the cliffs to watch the sunset. Valentina fell asleep in the back seat as they drove, and Camilla carried her baby weight with a practiced ease that made Ricardo admire her in a way that had nothing to do with physical beauty. It had to do with the steadiness in which she held what belonged to her. They walked without many words. The sky bled orange into purple. Sea swell sounded under them like a long, patient exhale. Ricardo stopped at a point where the cliff allowed a vast view of the horizon. He leaned on the rail and looked at the expanse. "I should tell you something," he said, turning to her. "Not tonight, perhaps, but soon. I don't want this to be awkward for you, me saying it and you feeling like you owe me something." Camilla looked at him. She could feel the cautiousness in his tone, carefully placed so as not to press. "You can tell me," she said. "But if it's something you think will change how I feel safe here, then wait." He swallowed, as though measuring the weight of words. The wind teased at his hair. "I like you," he said finally, "more than how it's proper for an employer to feel. I don't want to ruin the way this arrangement has helped you. I only want you to know. And if the knowledge makes you uncomfortable, I'll be more careful. I'll keep the boundaries we set. I promise." Camilla had imagined 1,000 confessions in her mind, wild, cinematic declarations of love that demanded a response. This was different. A simple, almost domestic admission that came with an offer to respect her limits. She thought of the nights alone that had taught her to be wary of any taste of tenderness that could be used as leverage. She thought of Helena's warnings, of the need to guard her agency. "I like you too," she said after a breath, "but I'm not sure I can fall fast. I don't know how to be sure yet. I want to protect myself, and I want to protect Valentina." He nodded. "I would not want you to rush," he said, "nor to feel like you have to because of shelter or money. If anything, I'll make sure there are no reasons to decide out of necessity." They stood there a long time, the salt air making their skin feel like it had been washed. He reached for her hand then, in a tentative, consenting motion that asked nothing more than a shared moment. She took it. The touch was careful but intentional, the kind of first contact that felt more like a mutual agreement than an imposition. It warmed them both without dissolving either into something they weren't ready to be. The rest of the trip was threaded with the same kind of carefulness. There were moments when the possibility of romance hovered like sea mist, when Ricardo brushed sand off her arm with the same movement he used to straighten a painting, when he learned to sing a silly chorus of Valentina's invented song, when Camilla began to leave a plate of the child's favorite crackers in the pantry. Each movement was small, and each was freely chosen. On the morning before they were to leave, Camilla found a note tucked under her door. Ricardo had written only a few lines. "I enjoyed seeing you with the sea. If you want, we can talk more when we return. No rush, no expectation." The note made her chest expand with something like relief. It was a modest thing, but that modesty felt like respect. Returning to the city brought its own silences. Traffic, work emails, the slant of office light. The house resumed its rhythm. Helena steamed into the kitchen with a new recipe, as if to reclaim domestic normalcy. Valentina drew a new family portrait that included a little house, 3 stick figures, and a son with a smile that was emphatically too big. She taped it to the refrigerator where anyone could see it. At work, Camilla continued to show up the same way she always had. The duties were familiar and gave her a place to land each day. Ricardo watched from a bit of distance the way she navigated small crises and tiny joys, and the way Valentina adored her without the filters adults invented. Weeks passed, stitched together by ordinary interactions. There was a day when a delayed courier left them both in an unguarded space, an afternoon where nothing urgent demanded attention, and both found themselves in the small study with a pot of tea between them. The conversation began with banalities and, in the manner of real intimacy, circled toward gravity. "Do you ever worry about the future?" Camilla asked, surprised at the simplicity of the question. Ricardo considered it. "Every time I look at Valentina," he said, "I do, not in the big theoretical way, more like, will I be the kind of person she can count on? Will I be present? I was absent before, in a different way. I promised myself I wouldn't be again." She watched his hands, the easy way they folded around the teacup. "I worry about whether I will become part of the story because it seems convenient, or whether I'll be a season, something temporary." "Then we make plans that aren't bound to convenience," he said. "We talk about them. We put things in the open. You deserve transparency. So do I. So does Valentina." They drew up small pacts in their speech, little practical agreements that had none of the show of legal documents, but all the importance of mutual promises. He would not make decisions about their household without consulting her. She would not feel pressured to change jobs or to sign away options because of the shelter he provided. If either wanted to change the arrangement, they'd speak openly and negotiate. There was a strange holiness in those conversations. No rose petals, just the sober clarity of people trying to build safe scaffolding. It was around this time that Camilla received a brief, bewildering text from Bruno. It said only, "I heard you were in town. Can we talk?" She held the phone in her hand for a long moment, and the familiar phantom ache rose, an old companion arriving without invitation. She deleted the message instead of responding. She could imagine 1,000 reasons to talk: closure, confrontation, the urge to make the past have a voice. But she knew what those conversations could do: pull at stitches that were only beginning to hold. Ricardo noticed the shift in her. He asked simply, "Is everything okay?" She said nothing at first. Then she told him, in sparse sentences, what had happened. He offered no grand gesture, no threats or bullying, but he also didn't minimize it. "If you want me to be there for anything you ask, phone calls, parking a car near you so you don't feel alone, I will," he said. "If you prefer I stay out, I will do that too." "I don't want a spectacle," she said. "I just didn't expect him to still be around." "Then we'll keep it private," he said. "No announcements, no pressure." When Bruno indeed tried to appear at the gate one evening, Ricardo quietly handled the logistics, texting the building's security to say he would collect Camilla's things if there was an exchange needed, and Camilla felt an odd sense of power, not because of Ricardo's wealth, but because he had created a frame in which she did not have to navigate the encounter alone. Bruno left messages that melted away in time, and Camilla's reply never came. She understood finally that some openings didn't require a response. Months moved, and with them a slow inward tilting that neither had rushed nor planned. The relationship deepened in ways that had little to do with shouting declarations and much to do with everyday decisions. Ricardo began to include Camilla in casual planning. A charity event where Valentina could come for a brief appearance, a neighborhood fair he wanted them all to attend, a quiet dinner with an old friend he trusted. Camilla began to share stories she had kept folded, an old photograph of her mother, a recipe that had been her grandmother's, a childhood memory that seemed to make her face change when she spoke of it. Each revelation came with care. Sometimes they argued about whether Valentina should have ice cream before bed, or whether Camilla should take an extra shift to save money for a plan she had in mind. They navigated those arguments with the same agreements they had made: speak your need, state your boundary, negotiate the outcome. There were nights where the negotiations left them both quiet and tired, and nights where they laughed at the small absurdities of trying to build a life together. The turning point, when possibilities narrowed into a clear, shared choice, happened not with a single dramatic event, but with a convergence of small ones. Valentina had been sick with a fever. Camilla had stayed up with her all night, rocking and humming, tracing circles on her forehead like a prayer. Ricardo slipped in at dawn with a bowl of soup and a look on his face that said, "I have seen you like this, and I love you for it." That afternoon, Valentina, pale-cheeked but fever gone, crawled into Ricardo's lap and asked, in the bluntness only children can wield, "When will we eat cake with 3 candles?" Both adults laughed, a little too loudly, the kind of laugh that comes from being found out. Later that evening, when the house had settled and Valentina slept with a small stuffed elephant tucked under her arm, Ricardo found Camilla in the kitchen with a rag in her hands, pretending to be busy as the way people pretend when they need courage. "I think I've been waiting for the right moment to say this in a way that wouldn't scare you off," he said, "but there is no perfect moment, so I will be clumsy instead." She folded a towel with slow fingers. "Clumsy is allowed," she said. He set the towel down and came closer. "I love you," he said simply. "I know we said go slow, and I mean it. I mean for you to have time. But I want to be honest about how I feel." Camilla looked at him. The truth, when it arrived in a clean sentence, had a newness and a clarity that made her heart click into place. "I love you too," she said after a pause, her voice small but steady. He reached for her hand and held it, as if confirming that the contact was welcome. "Can I kiss you?" he asked. The question landed in the air with a clarity that felt like an invitation and a promise. She could have said no. She could have retreated to the safety of the terms they had made. Instead, she looked at him and nodded, the consent in her eyes as clear as the sea had been months earlier. The kiss was quiet and careful, a closing of distance that had been shrinking in measured steps. It was not a rush into obsession, but a mutual finding, like two people leaning into the same corner of a blanket on a chill night. When they parted, both breathed, as if they had climbed a short summit. Camilla rested her forehead against his for a moment, feeling the pulse there. It was a tenderness that felt chosen, not purchased. They moved forward together with the same attention they'd given to everything else, no dramatic proclamations, but planning and conversations. They spoke frankly about what living together might mean long-term. Ricardo offered to help in practical ways, finding a place that felt like Camilla's, creating a fund for Valentina's education, but he always framed it as support to facilitate the life they might choose together, not as currency to buy commitment. They agreed on small milestones, dinners where they invited friends to witness the family they were building, a discussion about whether Camilla wanted to continue in her role long-term or to pursue other options, moments where each would check in about feelings and concerns. They planned a small weekend where they would simply be together and see how things felt when they were not negotiating practicalities. Those milestones were honored and sometimes revised. There were days of tenderness and days of old fears flaring up. An unreturned phone call, a memory of a slamming door that made Camilla flinch. On those days they did what they had promised themselves, speak openly rather than letting silence grow teeth. Camilla told him if she felt pressured. He softened. Ricardo confessed if he felt jealous. She reassured him. There were no grand public declarations, only a slow accumulation of actions that matched their words. Valentina continued to be both the glue and the impetus. She announced once, while playing with blocks, that she wanted a picture of the three of them to hang in her room. "So I know where everyone sleeps," she explained with child's solemnity. Ricardo and Camilla, smiling at the neat logic, took a photograph that afternoon. No formal studio, just the living room lit with late sunshine, and taped it to the refrigerator. Valentina declared it official, and the title made both of them ache at its simplicity. Helena remained a steady presence, wary at first, then warm, then protective again when needed. She teased Camilla mercilessly about the small domestic triumphs, about the way Ricardo had bought the wrong cereal and then tracked down the right brand at midnight, because he had noticed Camilla's preference. But she also supported her friend with stern practicalities, checking lease options, reminding Camilla to save, insisting on frank conversations about future desires. "Don't let this become something you feel you owe," she said once, folding Camilla's laundry with an exactitude that made the words land like a statement of policy. "You're not going to be my boss," Ricardo told Camilla one night, when Helena's warnings had been discussed in full view of the table. "I'm not making you choose, because I offered a couch. If you ever feel indebted in a way that isn't comfortable, we talk. You leave if it stops working. I won't make staying an obligation." "We both have to want the same things," Camilla said. "And if we don't, then at least we didn't have a story where one person swallowed the other's dignity." They agreed to a small, concrete step. Camilla would keep her position for as long as she wished, but they would begin searching, together and separately, for a place that felt like home for all of them. The search was practical, Rooms, budgets, neighborhoods, but under it hummed an emotional seriousness. They were deciding whether to construct a household together that respected who Camilla was and who Ricardo was, and which left room for Valentina to flourish. Weeks of searching turned into slow discoveries. They visited apartments where the light came wrong, and others that felt like borrowed rooms. Then, one ordinary Saturday, they found a small house that had a backyard big enough for a small garden and a porch that would take the weight of their laundry on Sundays. It had imperfections: a crooked step, a radiator that rattled occasionally, paint that had once been bright and was now wisely quiet. They laughed about those imperfections. They each saw in it a place to make stitches. They didn't sign anything in a dramatic ceremony. They made a plan, an agreement that if Camilla wanted to move out and take her life elsewhere, she could. But if she wanted to try building a life with Ricardo and Valentina, they would proceed as partners, each with agency. Ricardo insisted on a shared conversation with Helena present for the first week of moving, not as an oversight, but as a friend who had earned the right to be protective. When Camilla finally moved her things into the new house, it felt like a quiet victory rather than a conquest. She brought her suitcase, a few framed photographs, the little drawer where she kept Valentina's baby teeth, and a stack of recipe cards. Ricardo came with moving boxes and an extra pair of hands. Valentina declared it official by taping an enormous painting she had made to the wall, the house with 3 stick figures and a sun that wore sunglasses. They laughed, and the house felt like a house at last. They celebrated in small ways, a dinner where they toasted with sparkling juice, an afternoon of planting tiny seedlings in borrowed soil. There was no wedding, no vow exchanged in public. Instead, they marked their intention with private rituals, a Sunday morning pancake tradition, a reading of Valentina's favorite bedtime story in voices they practiced to make each other laugh, a shelf where all 3 of their toothbrushes stood together. Time, unreliable and kind, worked in their favor. The ache Camilla had felt when Bruno disappeared softened into a scar that told her she had survived. She found herself dreaming not of a fairy tale closure, but of ordinary futures. A child bringing home a broken toy, and the 3 of them figuring out how to fix it together. A winter where Ricardo made soup while she repaired a seam. Evenings of conversation with Helena and friends where they could be public and ordinary. There were still moments of old wounds. Once, an unexpected voicemail from a former colleague triggered memories of being judged for being young and single. Camilla called Helena that night, and they sat for a long time on the porch, watching Valentina sleep in the next room through the open window. Helena took her hand, steady and straightforward. "You chose this," she said, "not because someone saved you, but because you allowed yourself to be seen. That's different." Ricardo, for his part, had to relearn vulnerability. He found he could not always fix things by writing a check or setting a plan into motion. The skill he had once relied on, controlling variables, was less useful in the arena of human emotion. He learned to sit with uncertainty, to ask for help in small ways, to be taught by Camilla how to soothe a child's fear of thunderstorms. Those lessons made him softer, not less him. Valentina reshaped both of them by the gentle force of a child's needs. She asked once, matter-of-factly at the dinner table with an absurd seriousness, "When are we a family?" Camilla put her hand over the child's tiny one. "We are," she said. Ricardo looked up, his eyes wet with the sudden recognition that this word, family, could be defined by presence, not by paper. The months that followed were not a perfect arc into a novel's tidy ending. There were arguments, missteps, nights when doubts crept in. But those nights became fewer because they had practiced honesty. They celebrated small victories. First day at preschool for Valentina with both of them present. A birthday party where Helena officiated the cake cutting with theatrical flourish. A quiet afternoon where they all napped in a pile, the sun pressing the house warm. Once walking hand in hand down a tree-lined street, Ricardo stopped and turned to Camilla. "You remember when I overheard you?" he asked, referencing the night that had begun everything. He had never made the moment into a spectacle, but now he spoke of it as a gentle pivot in both their lives. She laughed. "How could I forget? I wanted to disappear." "You didn't," he said. "You stayed, and then you let us stay with you." "It wasn't always easy," she admitted. "Sometimes I felt like I traded a thing for another thing, but you never made me feel like a debt. You made a partnership out of it." He squeezed her hand. "And you never demanded proclamations. You let me be human." They paused, and for a moment the city around them softened. They had built something that required no proclamations because it was built of daily acts, making a child's lunch with care, remembering tea preferences, sitting through a bad movie because Valentina liked it, clearing dishes without counting coups. Their friends, including Helena, celebrated with small rituals, meals, casual visits, the occasional joke about how long it took for two adults to discover what children figured out in a morning. There were nights when they danced badly in the kitchen, three-stepped and out of rhythm, and then laughed until breathless. There were mornings when they sat in the yard and watched Valentina chase bubbles until they popped. One late summer evening, after Valentina had been tucked into bed, the three of them sat on the porch, Ricardo with a cup of tea, Camilla with a sketchbook where she doodled scenes from the day, and Valentina asleep inside, breathing steady. The house was full of ordinary sounds, a washing machine humming, the distant bark of a dog, the soft flutter of pages turning. Ricardo looked at Camilla, his face open in a way that had taken months to perfect. "I love the way you are with her," he said. "She trusts you in a way I never managed to build with anyone else. You give things to our life that don't cost anything, but are worth everything." Camilla traced a line on the page, an inconsequential motion that somehow held the day's contentment. "I didn't know I could have this," she admitted. "I thought losing him meant I lost my story. Instead, I found a new one. It's messy and real and sometimes terrifying, but it's ours." They spoke then of small future plans, no grand designs, but decisions that mattered, a promise to alternate weekend outings to see both of their families when appropriate, a decision to save for a small holiday, a resolution to have an honest conversation with Valentina about how families can look different and still be safe. They both pledged to continue the practice that had carried them this far, to speak when uncertain, to listen when the other was afraid. When Camilla's phone rang with a categorized number that would have been Bruno's if it were him, she didn't answer right away. She let it go to voicemail. Later, she listened to the message. A short, stammering apology about timing and regret. She closed the phone and put it away. She didn't need his words to decide what had been decided quietly across weeks of care. She had been chosen daily by people who stayed, who listened, who offered shelter with dignity. That was more than enough. As seasons edged, small markers began to accumulate. A photograph of the three of them taken in a patch of golden light, a Christmas tree decorated by sticky fingers with ornaments placed more for story than symmetry. A letter Camilla wrote for Valentina to read when she was older about the day she decided to move forward. They didn't promise forever in a single breath. They promised what they could: presence, honesty, willingness to continue learning how to be less lonely. Years later, friends would ask how it happened. Did he save her? Did she rescue him? The truth was simpler and harder to narrate. He overheard a private ache and did something that required no spectacle. He listened, offered space, and acted with regard. She accepted with agency, negotiating terms and preserving dignity. Valentina, in her own unfiltered ways, insisted they become a family by the steady force of being loved. They chose each other again and again, in small acts that were not transactional. On a quiet afternoon, as they watched Valentina trace freehand hearts across a page and tape it to the refrigerator, Ricardo kissed Camilla's temple and said, You remember the night I heard you? I could have done nothing." She leaned into the kiss, feeling how ordinary and true it had become. "You didn't," she said. "You listened. You sheltered us. You chose us." He smiled, and the smile held the memory of a man who had once closed his heart to the world and then learned to open it slowly. "And you chose back," he said, his voice steady. "That was the other part I needed." They stood there, a modest, imperfect family in a small house that smelled of soup and sunscreen, of crayons and laundry. It was not a fairy tale, nor a rescue. It was an accumulation of care, consent, and choice that looked in its quiet way like something very close to love. If this story moved you, subscribe and share. There are more heartwarming rebuilds coming.